All right, so my name is Matthew Gillikin. I'm one of the co-chairs of Livable Seville. Livable Seville advocates for policies to build an inclusive Charlottesville area with affordable housing, sustainable transportation, and healthy neighborhoods welcoming to all. One of the biggest challenges and questions facing communities like Charlottesville and Albemarle County is how to address the high cost of housing to make it more broadly accessible while allowing current residents to remain in their homes and for neighborhoods to maintain a sense of place. So to talk about this, we have two amazing speakers tonight. We have Dr. Karen Chapple, who's the director of the School of Cities at the University of Toronto, where she also serves as a professor in the Department of Geography and Planning. She previously was at Cal Berkeley. And one of her focus is the equalities in planning, development, and governance of regions in the Americas, with a focus on economic development and housing. She's written many books and articles, and she's the director of the Urban Displacement Project, which aims to understand issues such as displacement and exclusion and identify policies that support equitable development. Prior to entering academia, she worked as a city planner. She is also, I think, of note, a stage mom and at an art school, and she's also been a foster mom for Labradors. So, um, and our other speaker is Sarah Malpass from here in Charlottesville. She is an AICP certified planner whose work focuses on advancing equitable development and environmental justice for communities. She has 17 years of experience in the fields of urban and environmental planning, equitable community engagement, communications, and storytelling. She's also the vice president of the Fifeville Neighborhood Association, where she's focused on advancing the residents' goals and visions for the future of the community and building partnerships for positive community change. So, with that said, Professor Chappell, I'll let you take over.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for the invitation. It's been a long time since I've been to Charlottesville. I would have loved to just fly down there, but it wasn't going to happen tonight. And thank you for mentioning my role as a dog and human mom. I do a lot of webinars and nobody's ever mentioned that, and to me it's like the highlight of my life is
Yeah,
my Labradors.
your
So
CV is very long, but I was able to pull out like the true highlights.
you're right. So I am going to talk about the Urban Displacement Project today, and I'm going to share my screen. And my aim with this group, knowing that you all are first of all, many of you are experts on this yourselves, and many of you have on the ground experience and lived experience that can actually contribute to a discussion. So I'm going to be pretty quick in my presentation and leave lots of time for us to kind of dig into what anti-displacement policy should look like in Charlottesville, which is the kind of the interesting question here. So I often start with some definitions just because when I started this work, which was about 15 years ago, I started working on gentrification around transit because the Regional Council of Governments in the Bay Area was interested in understanding that. And I quickly realized that if you say the word gentrification, people have very mixed feelings about it. There's a lot of places that say, where people will say, well, actually we need a little gentrification because they think of it as investment and as opposed to disinvestment. So we quickly realized that you really have to be laser focused on displacement if you want to kind of build consensus, because everybody agrees that it's that an injustice has occurred if somebody loses their home. And it's much more of a unifying term. It really taps into shared values better than gentrification. So that's why we're the Urban Displacement Project and not the Urban Gentrification Project. And just to kind of bring that point home, we in all of our work we start with a definition. We point out that when we're talking about gentrification, we're talking about an influx of capital and or high income, high educated residents into disinvested areas. And then displacement is kind of simply when households are forced to move. And we actually include the idea that it's also when people can't move into a neighborhood, so it can be exclusionary because of conditions which are, beyond their control. And I would suspect that if we were to look at Charlottesville, we would see a lot of exclusion. We would see a lot of neighborhoods that people just can't move into. Displacement occurs in all kinds of neighborhoods. It occurs in affluent areas, it occurs in low-income areas. It can be physical. It could be because the city, it demolishes your house because they need it for a new park. It could be economic, like a rent increase, or it could be exclusionary. And the last point from the literature is that gentrification displacement may not be tightly related. Anyway, that's a whole other point I can go into later, but it's not every gentrified neighborhood displaces. And that's mostly because often the displacement happens long time before the gentrification happens. So property owners, landlords, investors often make sure that the displacement happens, and then they begin to kind of spur the neighborhood change. So it's a very complicated relationship. This is from a HUD publication in the 1970s. I always like to start here because it is so interesting that 50 years ago, HUD really was focused on displacement. It was dealing with the impacts of urban renewal. And these folks, Greer and Greer, did this fabulous report, which is still relevant today, about all the ways people get displaced from their homes. And it's very complex. Urban renewal matters in this country largely because of a legacy of urban renewal. So the 1950s and 60s saw the Interstate Highway Act and urban renewal displacing many people across the U.S. It's estimated at 1 million households displaced through urban renewal. The University of Richmond has a wonderful lab on this. There's also another 1 million households displaced by the highways. So what's interesting is that it's 1 million people and 300,000 families. That whole legacy of urban renewal, of changing the urban fabric and displacing families and businesses, that is a legacy that has really traumatized neighborhoods, and it's to this day those impacts, their intergenerational impacts, they're what psychologist Mindy Fullilove calls root shock. That shock of losing the home tends to be passed down through generations. This is just the celebration by Robert Moses of Lincoln Center, which happened to displace 7,000 families. Those 7,000 families are still kind of dealing with this impact of being uprooted. Many of them are still dealing with it today. So in our work, we were focused very much on transit. This is one of the books. And one of the things we learned through studying transit stations throughout the great state of California was that transit may displace communities, but it might not. And you cannot predict it through a fancy random forest machine learning model. It really is something that you need to understand on the ground from local context. So you can have, one train station, subway station that's in the middle of a highway and nothing happens. You can have another where they've done beautiful streetscaping improvements and rents have skyrocketed and everybody gets displaced. So you really have to understand what that local context is. When we started working on displacement, we quickly put up a website, which is at urbandisplacement.org. This website gets about 10,000 hits a month. So from individual users, it's a huge number of people come on the website really just to, actually, most of them just watch our video and then leave. We have a what is gentrification and what is displacement explainers. Those are very popular. But some people come in and use the maps, and the maps are for selected cities. I'm afraid we don't have Charlottesville on there, but it's where we have used census and other data to do what we call a neighborhood early warning system. So we're looking at areas that are susceptible to change. We're looking in particular where we're likely to see displacement happen in the future. And one of the things we do, you could see in this sample map, which is on here, is that we differentiate displacement in low-income areas, which is purple, from that in high-income areas, which is orange, because displacement, again, is happening in both places. And it's really happening in San Francisco. All these areas in orange are extremely high income, and they just haven't allowed any building in the area. And so over time, they may have been diverse before, but over time, they're getting more and more exclusionary. Low-income, middle-class households can't move into those areas anymore. So that's something that may apply, I think, to Charlottesville, and I would love to talk about more with you. One of the things we found after we put maps up on the web, we realized that people were using them. So this man went to testify at council about gentrification, displacement in San Jose to say, hey, look, here's my neighborhood. The experts, whether we're experts or not, can be questioned, but the experts, the university says we are at risk, and you all have to pass some sort of anti-displacement policy. So one of the things we've realized over time is that this is the most important thing you can do is provide tools that will legitimize what people are experiencing on the ground, and help make the case, both in anecdotal terms and in actual data, to policymakers that we need to do something. So we've gotten more and more sophisticated with our tools online. We have, this is a map where we've mapped all the climate related investments, and by that I mean transit lines, parks, infill development, and bikeways, bike lanes, and looked at the mobility around them to kind of look at that relationship between the two. In the punchline of a lot of this work is that you may or may not see displacement. Again, it sort of depends on the local context. But in almost every case, we find that when you make these investments, it's harder for people to move in. So basically, people get pushed further and further out to the periphery of the region because they can't afford to live in the area anymore. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with a couple slides on policy. When I talk about anti-displacement policy, I like to kind of see it as an array that is a different time frames. So you can make interventions that are essentially legal, that are moving quickly to save a building from demolition or save a tenant from eviction. Those happen very fast. You have a policy framework, which might be a year or two, where you're working with council to get something passed. And then you have a long-term horizon framework, and where you're looking at how do you keep your area, your neighborhood, your city diverse, and preserve its affordability for people for the next generation. And the issue is that we have to work at all these levels at once, or we're not going to be able to have a successful anti-displacement policy. So here are some of the examples of the types of policies that are in each of these buckets, the types of tenant protections, and the types of housing preservation initiatives you can take, and then the ways we can spur production of market rate and affordable housing through different, primarily zoning tools, but also finance tools. And I heard from Matthew that he sent out our white paper on anti-displacement policies. So we're actually updating that right now, with a few hundred other articles that have come out on these different types of policies and programs. One of the interesting things is that is the ones we had forgotten to include or omitted. One that we are including now is short-term rental regulation. That actually turns out to be one of the very most effective ways to preserve affordability is if you can slow down Airbnb in your community. And just, I think this is my last slide here, just thinking about anti-displacement policies. These take different forms and all the different policies, each is going to work in a different context. So if you, on the left, you see leveraging the market. So if you are a strong market community, which is certainly how I think of Charlottesville, then you have an opportunity to leverage the market to provide affordability in some way. And you can do that either by actually asking the market as it's building housing to generate affordable units, or leveraging funds, creating housing trust funds, for example, through different types of fees. If you don't have that leverage, if you are, parts of the Rust Belt and so forth, then, you think more about public investment and what you can do. And certainly if I were Charlottesville, I would be thinking about public investment too. For the long run, I would be thinking about land banking, and public land disposition and community land trusts and some of the longer term interventions, at the same time as trying to leverage the market. It's you have the opportunity to kind of do everything everywhere all at once, and you probably need to. So that's it for my chat, and I guess I'll turn it over now to Sarah.
Thank you so much. We'll go over to Sarah. And if we're after Sarah talks, we're gonna have a discussion that will be in part driven by questions that you all have. So feel free to put questions in the chat that you have now or as you're thinking of some. And I will we'll start to ask those as Sarah wraps up her presentation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Karen and Matthew. It's a joy to be here with you guys tonight. As Matthew shared, I'm the president of the Fifeville Neighborhood Association, so I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the anti-displacement efforts that the FNA has been leading to help achieve the vision and the goals that our residents have come up with for our community. First, I just want to highlight a couple of things about Charlottesville. I think most folks on the call tonight will know these numbers, but we know that there are significant displacement pressures across Charlottesville, not just in Fifeville. Between 2000 and 2021, the number of white non-Hispanic homeowners in Charlottesville increased by 15%. In the same time period, the number of Black homeowners in Charlottesville decreased by 19%. And then we also know that there are similar pressures on renters, that rents are rising at rates that are disproportionate to the rates at which the incomes, especially for Charlottesville's Black households, are rising, which creates a significant affordability gap and racial disparity in terms of folks' experience with who can be in Charlottesville. So for anybody who does not know where Fifeville is, we are located just south of the UVA health system. This is a map of the community, including Buford Middle School right in the middle, Forest Hills Park, Tonsler Park. Cherry Avenue is kind of the commercial heart of the neighborhood. We are a historically Black neighborhood, and we are just barely hanging on to that designation. As of the last census numbers I looked at, I think we were at 51 or 52% African American in Fifeville, and that number used to be significantly higher. The Neighborhood Association is a group that meets monthly. If you'd love to join us, we are meeting on the second Thursday of each month. And we take an approach to community development that includes really listening to and discussing resident concerns and priorities. Our agendas are driven by those concerns that residents bring up. We've worked really hard over the last 10 years to build a shared vision for the future of the community, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We're also really interested in building the power to advocate for residents' interests. We know that historically this community has not had the power to create the change that it wants to see, and so that is a role that we think the neighborhood association can help play. And in service of that, we have really taken an approach that emphasizes collaboration, partnerships, and community building to increase our voice at the table. Just a little bit about some of the concerns that our community has. We think that Cherry Avenue, which is our commercial kind of corridor, is going to look completely different in 10 years. There's a lot of concern about how we can ensure that businesses, services, and housing that come to Cherry Avenue will benefit current residents and meet their vision for the future as opposed to displacing them or benefiting others who come to the community. We're also anticipating property values continuing to rise as they currently are in Charlottesville, and that many properties are going to change hands. So we want to be thinking about what we can do to prevent displacement of families who are vulnerable to those changes while also investing in upward mobility. And then finally, there's going to be an influx of new businesses and new people in our neighborhood. And so we want to think not only about how to welcome them, but what we can do to preserve and celebrate our community's unique history as a Black and multicultural community. In March of 2021, the vision that our residents developed was adopted into city planning policy. The vision is up on the screen. And this was a huge victory for our community because it meant that we now had the policy space to have conversations with developers and others who are looking to invest in our neighborhood and to say, hey, we have a vision that the community has come together around. We'd love to work with you and figure out how to make that vision a reality. There are three kind of current implementation focus areas that we are thinking about: anti-displacement, increasing affordable and deeply affordable housing in our community, and making sure that as those kinds of investments are made, we're also investing in neighborhood-oriented goods and services. We're located so close to the university, and I think there's just a constant fear that goods and services that come in will be to serve folks who are outside of our community instead of folks who are inside our community. So how are we going to get it done? Here are three values that have kind of guided our work over the last 10, 15 years. These are values that evolved as we got into the work and found out what worked for us and what didn't. And I think if there's anything that I would want folks to take away from the presentation tonight, it's that this is how we think we can create positive change. By promoting community building, relationships, collaboration. We really emphasize win-win partnerships and working strength to strength with our partners. The Fifeville Neighborhood Association is a very vocal, but also in some ways a small organization. We are all volunteer, and so there are certain things we're good at and certain things that we need our partners to do. So working strength to strength is really important to us. And then staying true to the residents' vision for racial equity, addressing issues of disparity in our community, social equity, and placekeeping. And placekeeping was important to our residents as we put our vision together. The term placemaking was suggested to us numerous times, and residents said, no, we've been here. This is a place that we built, and it's a place that we want to keep. So our approach to these conversations around anti-displacement has been the community vision plus shared power can create positive change. I'm going to talk for a little bit about what we've done over the past 10 years or so, and then I'll give a snapshot of where we're at and what we're working on right now, and then I'll pass the mic back to Matthew. We entered this conversation around displacement really around 2015 when a hotel was approved on Cherry Avenue. It set off a massive reaction among residents who did not feel that they had been engaged and were really concerned about the displacement implications of that new investment and concerned that Cherry Avenue would become a space that was really oriented towards UVA instead of towards residents. So we went through a lengthy planning process, and in 2021, as I said, the small area plan that captured the residents' vision was adopted into city policy. In parallel with that, you'll see the timeline in gray along the bottom. It was really important to us that we weren't just building a plan, but we were also looking at how do we move immediately into implementation. And so we picked one project, which was to restore the Fifeville Trail. And that project enabled us, as we were doing the small area planning, to begin to put together a really creative and nimble team of implementation partners who could come alongside us, listen to the community's vision, figure out how to restore this trail that historically had served the community, then was taken away, and now is restored. So here's just some quick few pictures of young folks on the trail. We're really excited that that trail is open and hopeful that the work that we've done there has created some momentum that will allow us to move towards implementation on other projects in the community. We pivoted once the trail was up into thinking about finding a partner for a catalyst site. We wanted to put forward a vision for positive development along Cherry Avenue, recognizing that the next big investment in the community needed to be one that the community supported. We were really fortunate to have built a relationship through the trail construction process with a local developer. And we're able to continue conversations with that developer who happened to own the 501 Cherry property. They were amenable to having conversations with us, and in fact approached us about what would it look like if we did development on that site. They wanted to make sure that there was space for things that residents wanted to see. And so we came up with a pretty unique MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that captures a series of community benefits that we've all agreed that we're aiming towards at the site, including, but not limited to, that the development team would host at least 3 design meetings to make sure that the design of the site responds to community concerns. Those design meetings did result in us wrestling with how tall should these buildings be, and I think we landed at a place of compromise that most residents are comfortable with, and reduced the height of the buildings from 5 to 4. We'll get 71 units of permanently affordable housing that Piedmont Housing Alliance will build and run. There'll be space for the Music Resource Center, which our community residents are really excited to get to keep in the neighborhood. And space was proffered for a small grocery store, which is now offered to the Charlottesville Food Co-op. If you are interested in following along with the co-op, I'll drop a link to their website in the chat later on, and you can sign up for their newsletter. So those are some of the projects that we've been engaged with to date. And now I want to talk a little bit about how we are seeking to continue to combat displacement in our community. We have 3 priorities that we've been working on over the last couple of years. One is, how can we increase the affordable housing supply? 2, how can we strengthen policies and practices that address anti-displacement and neighborhood preservation? And then 3, how can we obtain site-based commitments for community benefits? So some of the major partnerships and activities that we have been driving related to those priorities include convening a work group that focuses on anti-displacement. We also participate in the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition, and then we do try to track and engage with site-by-site opportunities and concerns. So I want to talk a little bit about each of those 3. The anti-displacement work group is a work group that convenes quarterly. It's a work group that is open to residents, to landowners, to developers, and to other community partners who work on displacement issues in Charlottesville. Some of the goals of the group are just to convene and build relationships. We have found that relationships are really what allows us to make change at the ground level. And so we wanted a space where folks could just come together and be in relationship with each other. We also want to use that time to cultivate a development culture that centers community benefits and that also centers our residents' vision for racial equity, social equity, and placekeeping. It's a space where we can debate and build shared understandings about solutions and conduct joint advocacy for specific solutions. Couple of wins that have come out of that. Most meetings start with roundtable updates on current development, and that has just been a really great way to share information with each other and make sure that folks know what's going on in the community and build that culture of a focus on community benefits. We also had some advocacy that came out of conversations in the anti-displacement work group around starting a land bank. The FNA participated in several community events and advocacy and invited the anti-displacement work group members to offer their support for the land bank as well. Still working on that and hoping the city will get there. And then we partnered with the Commissioner of the Revenue on streamlining the real estate tax relief program and a few other relief programs, and explored with him how to make sure that the word was getting out efficiently to residents so that they could access those programs. On the Charlottesville Low Income Housing Coalition front, the goal there is to build the power of the core neighborhoods, the historically Black neighborhoods in Charlottesville and allies, to advocate together for resident-centered solutions. That coalition is currently advocating for some refinements to the zoning code and other changes that will make sure that as we continue forward with implementing our new zoning code, that there's opportunities to make sure that where we need to make tweaks so that Black and low-income residents are not displaced, that we are doing so. So there's 4 advocacy areas that are listed on the screen. I won't read through them, but there's a letter that has gone to the city with 47 organizations that are signed on to ask the city to consider these 4 solutions. And then finally, engaging with site-by-site opportunities and concerns. We have a very limited amount of remaining developable land in Fifeville, and we want to make sure that as major developments come forward, that they are moving in ways that align with the Cherry Avenue Small Area Plan. Our hope is at each site to be in relationship with the developer and the landowners and to identify and secure community benefits at each site. And to support community engagement processes that build relationships, understanding, and trust over time at each site. A few wins that we've had in that area. The Land Trust developed 5 new home ownership opportunities on Prospect Avenue in Fifeville. And FNA and other community-based organizations worked closely with the Land Trust to develop a resident pipeline, with the goal being that those homes would be occupied and owned by folks who have a history in the community. And that was a very successful effort. We ended up getting, I believe, all 5 homes sold to families who have a long history in the community and were ready to become homeowners. So we're really excited that we not only have these new homes, affordable homes permanently in our community, but that those homes actually benefited long-term residents. The 501 Cherry Avenue project, knock on wood, is breaking ground this spring. And that will bring new rental units, affordable rental units to our community. Oak Lawn, which is a large plantation property that we had been negotiating with the university on regarding community benefits, has been transferred from UVA to the city and the city schools, and we hope to continue conversations about whether there are opportunities there for mixed-use development, including affordable housing at that site. And then we're also tracking opportunities for development at multiple sites across the neighborhood, the starred sites here, and continuing to reach out to landowners and developers to see where we may be able to find mutual opportunities and win-wins for the residents and for the development teams that are thinking about these sites. So how can you get involved? We would love to have any and all of you at Fifeville Neighborhood Association meetings. If you're interested in joining the anti-displacement work group, you can shoot me an email and I'll be happy to add you to that list. And then finally, if you are a developer or a landowner and you have a development project in Fifeville, we want to talk to you. So reach out to us and we would love to talk about how we can create community benefits together. Also want to encourage folks to join the Charlottesville Food Co-op's mailing list. They're a really great group. They're working really hard to bring affordable and culturally relevant food back to our community. And they need everybody's support as they're getting up and off the ground. So you can join their mailing list at the website that's listed there. And then CLIC, which is the Coalition for Low Income Housing, also has a mailing list that you can join to keep up with the advocacy work that they do. Matthew, back to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Sarah, could you just give us the latest on what's happening with the food co-op?
Sure. So we the Neighborhood Association went through a um, evaluation and community engagement process to understand what kind of grocery store would make the most sense at 501 Cherry. Grocery stores, as I have come to learn, are really, really difficult business with very thin margins, and getting a grocery store in a space as small as the one that's available at 501 Cherry makes it extremely difficult. We were fortunate enough through the community engagement process that was run in 2024 to hear clearly from the community that they wanted a grocery store that would offer opportunities for ownership, community-based ownership, and having roots in the community. And so that led the Neighborhood Association in conjunction with the other MOU partners, Wooded Properties and Piedmont Housing Alliance, to offer the space to the Charlottesville Food Co-op. They currently have a steering committee that has been working for a little over a year, I believe, and they also just recently got awarded a large grant from the Charlottesville Area Community Foundation that's going to enable them to build on the work that they've already done and get a little bit more detailed with their financial projections and design for the store. And so that space has been offered to them, and we're really excited to continue that partnership and that journey with them as we work towards getting that space secured for them. My understanding is that at some point they will start selling memberships, and I hope that everybody who is local to Charlottesville will buy a membership and will shop there. And the best way to find out when that will be happening is to join their mailing list and to follow them on social media. I'll drop that link to their website into the chat so that folks can really easily. Oh, Matthew's already done it.
I already
So
put
just
it in.
click
Yep.
on that, sign up, and then definitely follow them on social media as well.
Great. Thank you. Karen, I guess listening to what Sarah's describing of the Fifeville Neighborhood Association's work, could you like what impressed you and what do you think could maybe even further what they're doing, or what do you think the city of Charlottesville should be thinking about based on what you're hearing?
Well, it's fabulous. Congratulations. That was really inspiring presentation, and it makes me want to I've, there's a lot of great neighborhood associations out there across the country, and I just wish they could come together and share, and you could share with them what you're doing. I think you've made so much progress already. It's really impressive. And yet you are up against such a big issue. As you say, 10 years, things are going to be different. And these are sea changes. These are macroeconomic forces. This is growing inequality. This is defunding of housing programs ongoing for the last 40 years. You can't do anything about that in Fifeville directly. So, right. So, but you can still do some little things, but I think you're being very strategic about it. I have a question and a comment. So the question is, so that hotel in 2015, the Fairfield, comes in. Did people get displaced from that? Have you been able to draw a line between that and the?
I don't know that anybody's done a direct study on that. What I can say is that the area around the hotel is significantly less occupied by long-term residents of the neighborhood than
Mhm.
other areas of the community. Was that a direct result of the hotel? A lot of that happened before, but not all of it. The other thing that I will say is that the direct feedback that we've gotten from residents as some things have begun to change on Cherry Avenue is that um, many longtime residents feel that that space is no longer for them. And
Yeah,
so even if they are hanging on in the neighborhood, it begins to feel very isolating.
yeah,
And that's another experience that we're seeking to reverse in the community.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's this relationship between cultural and commercial displacement and residential displacement. And, often people start to feel displaced in place first. And it can be a harbinger of future residential displacement. And that I think sort of maybe what you are seeing and working towards is, the things that the transformations that could happen. Um, and a lot of that is often led by something like a hotel. A catalytic change will make that, put that process into, start it going.
Yeah.
Um, my comment is about student housing, and which is a really tough issue, and it's a issue I've dealt with everywhere that I've lived, from Providence, Rhode Island, to Berkeley, California. Similar size places to Charlottesville, or maybe a little bigger in the case of Providence, but that enormous tension between the student population and the existing neighborhoods, and so often the university is right next to a community of color, and it means displacement of long-term Black residents. Um, that said, the question is how you deal with it, and in what happens if you don't build the student housing. And that is worth, I think, carefully thinking about, because typically if students can't find a dorm room, they will rent a room wherever they can, or they will group up with 8 or 10 of their peers and rent a whole house. And so often in neighborhoods like yours, you will see this displacement happening house by house as the students move in. And this happens everywhere. I'm thinking about Stony Brook too, as another example of where. So the thing is that if well, there's a couple different ways to kind of prevent that slow drip of student-led displacement, or studentification, some people call it. And so, I mean, one thing is to work with the student housing developer, help them help them build where the students want to live, as a way of kind of preventing that kind of individual one by one, room by room, house by house displacement that you'll see. Another way to do it, so one of the contradictions is that many times the people in the neighborhood actually want a few students in. Well, they don't want a whole bunch of students, but they want one student to come rent the room when grandma's away for 3 months. Or they're not, they're actually can use the income, and this is a tension with Airbnb too. Um, so maybe there's a way to develop some kind of home sharing program, and some cities have done this very successfully to deal with their older population, their seniors, that actually would kind of like to have a student around, would feel safer with someone in the house, or somebody who could help with the chores. And so, so instead of having kind of that violence of the gentrification, you have sort of the welcoming of a sharing kind of program where you kind of drive, you're still driving it. You're driving the change because, you know, you're organizing it and making sure everybody benefits. Yeah, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is just, I was curious if you have like mapped all the vulnerable properties. It looked kind of like you have looked at it, but you really have to look building by building because these processes, you know, if you're going to stem the studentification, you're going to have to understand who owns each property and what is their financial circumstances and what are their motives. How old are they? You know, all these factors come into play when you're thinking about the vulnerability of a particular property. So I hope you're able to get that kind of data.
Yeah, I can share that the city has been a great partner to us in helping provide access to GIS mapping and analysis at various points when we have had questions. One of the analyses we did, and it's a couple of years old at this point, was to look at where are trust properties in the community, and to think about what's the opportunity for legacy when those trusts are ready to sell. So the anti-displacement work group and the Community Land Trust and Piedmont Housing Alliance have had conversations about, could we raise a significant amount of funding to have an opportunity to be ready to buy, and then what kind of relationship do we need to be in now with those, with the families whose names are on those trusts, so that when and if they decide to sell, those homes can be moved into permanently affordable housing, perhaps as a legacy, for families who may have built some of those homes many years ago and no longer have members who are living in Charlottesville in those homes. So that's something that we've looked at that has not moved forward as of yet, but certainly something we're thinking about and want to continue tracking.
Yeah, you may know, Washington, D.C. has a program called Tenant Opportunity to Purchase. This it and that I mean, you're dealing with what I was going to say is some cities that have enacted TOPA laws have said, okay, we're going to have number one, tenant opportunity to purchase, and number two, nonprofit opportunity to purchase, so that you can have a community land trust that is ready to come in but that it's helpful to have that in your city law as an ordinance that gives you that right, because otherwise they'll take the first buyer and the cash offer and so forth. So yeah.
In Virginia, we're constrained by state law that doesn't let us have laws like that in our city until we get that changed at a state level. But that
You
is
got
an
to get to
interesting
your new
thing.
governor right away if you want that sort
Well,
of thing.
we got big hopes for Governor Spanberger, especially in the realm of housing. Um, Karen, I was kind of curious about your thoughts on leveraging market development. You talked about, so Charlottesville with its new zoning code has an inclusionary zoning provision, which is the first time we've had that because we got enabling legislation from the state a few years ago. Um, it's a little bit of a controversial topic. We're going to do a webinar on it actually next month to further discuss because I think that there are potentials for benefit of providing access to housing to people who couldn't otherwise afford it. And then there's potential for benefit in terms of Charlottesville has at least a portion of it for in lieu fees that go to affordable housing. But there's also potential that it could restrict development. I guess I'm just kind of curious some of your thoughts on what you've seen work well in terms of inclusionary zoning policies, because that's what we love for the city to continue to fine tune it to make sure that it works well for the city.
Yeah, it's a very contentious issue, and I just reviewed like 20 new studies on it. So, and they're still debating it. You might look towards a city like Santa Monica, which has a tiered inclusionary housing policy, which is geared. So it first of all, the best tiered inclusionary housing policies change based on the economy. So strong economy, you would take you penalize the developers more, and weak economy, you don't penalize. So maybe you waive it for a couple years, and then you offer developers choice. So you can do, 4 units or 5% of your units for extremely low income households, or you can do 10% for moderate income households, and offer these types of tiers that then the developer can find the one that actually works and makes it pencil. There is a lot of disagreement about on-site versus in lieu fees for inclusionary, and I am not as many of my Hauser friends believe very strongly in on-site inclusionary, because they want to have the mixing in the building, and they want to have the great location. I tend to prefer the in lieu fees, because because I think it's a way to get more housing built in the long run. And one of the things that we've learned is that, unfortunately, we did the study in San Francisco on inclusionary versus 100% affordable, and inclusionary actually is more likely to gentrify and transform the neighborhood, as opposed to on 100% affordable. So to the extent that you can take those in lieu fees, pour them into the housing trust fund, and build one, building like you're doing already, 71 affordable units, that's going to be the biggest bang for your buck, I believe. But again, the debate is still ongoing. And by the way, when I saw that 71 unit building, I thought, do you have community preference? So is it, do the people that get to move in, are they from the general Charlottesville wait list, or can you make a preference for Fifeville?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have to follow fair housing law, and this is a conversation that we had with the community land trusts as well. And so I think in both instances, and successfully so with the land trust homes, and we hope successfully at 501 Cherry in the rental market, that we will be able to do, kind of early advertising within our own community, and other things that will help create a pipeline so that our residents who want to move into those homes, or perhaps young folks who have grown up in our community but now no longer can live in our community and would like to move back and be closer to family, know up that when those homes will be coming online and can get themselves into the pipeline early. So that'll be the strategy with 501 Cherry and the rentals there. And we're crossing our fingers for as much success as we had with the land trust home sales.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great.
So Sarah, you like to talk about and actually carry out the ability to build and maintain relationships. And I think that the idea of a neighborhood like Fifeville having relationships with developers is not a very common occurrence, certainly not in Charlottesville, and I don't think in many other places. Could you just share a little bit more about some of I mean, I guess some advice or what you like a bit more for those who are home builders who would be interested in building in a neighborhood like Fifeville or elsewhere, what they maybe could be thinking about when they're thinking about engaging with FNA or other neighborhoods in Charlottesville, like 10th and Page or Rose Hill.
Yeah, where to start? So
You got 2 minutes.
yeah. Well, I would say the first thing is just to reach out to the neighborhood association leadership, and if you're local, to come to some neighborhood association meetings. It's a worthwhile investment of your time, not just getting to know the neighborhood association leadership, but residents themselves. Um, in terms of long-term relationships, we would love to have folks join the anti-displacement work group. That's a great place to get to know other folks who are active in the community. And then if you have a project, one of the things that the neighborhood association is eager to work with developers on is thinking about how you can proactively and efficiently engage with the community to understand what are the opportunities where community input can actually influence outcomes at your site, and how can we help you get that input so that we can find those areas of mutual benefit as you're thinking about development. So we are looking for win-wins. We understand that not all interests will always align 100%. But I think where we've been successful is just being able to sit down and have honest conversations, transparent conversations about what can change and what can't at a site, and looking for those win-win opportunities.
Great, that's awesome. I think that that is something I'm really excited to see maybe emerge over time and to create some ways in which there are tremendous gaps, tremendous mistrusts, tremendous misunderstandings, but to the end of creating development within, in a certain sense, every neighborhood in Charlottesville that works well for that neighborhood, but also acknowledges that there are many people that want to live here. There's many people that want to access Charlottesville between what we have to offer and we think about within the times we live in now. There are many places in this country that are not safe for many people right now, and Charlottesville is safer in many ways than many other communities. So we are going to see people that want to be in a place like Charlottesville. So how can we include them? But I think what I've learned from you and from FNA about this relational aspect with home builders is really novel. I don't see a lot of chatter about that in housing, blue sky, or anything like that. So I think it's really cool to hear about. We're going to wrap up there. I'm just going to share a couple things. Again, if you want to support Pacham this weekend, please email Cindy at pachamshelter.org. I'm going to put the link in the chat for our next webinar, which is going to be on inclusionary zoning with Michael Anderson from Sightline Institute and Kelly Brown from the City of Charlottesville. And then also going to announce a webinar that we have not made public yet. On Monday, March 30th, we are going to be joined by the folks from the War on Cars podcast to talk about their book, Life After Cars. And we're going to be joined by local e-bike dad, Jamel Bowie, who is going to share what he thinks life after cars in Charlottesville could look like. So we hope you'll sign up for that. I think that's going to be a really fun conversation. And then lastly, tomorrow night, VDOT is in the city are taking feedback on a new design for the intersection of West Main and Ridge Street. So there may be protected bike lanes as part of that, which would be very exciting for the city and to help make a safer and more equitable transportation network for the city. So thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate the conversation. I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you.